guys, ready to get started? I am Elizabeth Stephenson, back at you with chapter 3 in our series, The Really Big Picture, where I'll be sharing with you logical and highly reasonable solutions to some of life's biggest questions about the big guy in the sky, if he really even does exist. In the last chapter, we talked about a supreme being and a host of supernatural characters. We ended with 3 little words, one big idea: God is light. So this talk will continue that timeline progression, which we had started then as preceding the creation of the known universe, and move through 10 to the 43rd Planck time, the earliest measurement of time yet, all the way through to Homo sapiens. So we're covering a lot of ground today, to say the least. It's almost 15 billion years to be exact, which may surprise you to hear me say. You might have thought that this was a religious sermon. It's not. I hope it's obvious that I am not some priest who's going to shove faith down your throats, like you've got to suspend your intellect to possibly believe anything so unrealistic as that a loving creator made all of the heavens and earth in 7 days. For some of you, the bigger question might be why, in which case I would recommend going back and watching my last episode. But for the rest of you, the bigger question might be how he could have done it. And we'll talk about that today. And I mean, I love this stuff. Like, I get really excited and super nerdy about all the little details. And so I want to share with you what I've come across in my own personal quest to my biggest questions in life. These are black and white laws of the universe, but their collection is simply my most educated guess as to how it could have all gone down in a way that uses science, physics, biology, chemistry, geology, astronomy, and neuroscience to create a surprisingly unified picture that concurs with the ex nihilo stories from the Torah, the Bible, the Quran, because I believe that the creation of the universe supersedes religious teams. None of this is my own information. It wasn't hidden. I didn't have to travel around the world or dig into some banned ancient texts in a secret library vault. It was all readily available and easily accessible. It was just scattered and uncollected or disconnected. Assorted experts in their areas of field produced the information and made it accessible, but no one had looked at the collective whole together to gather it and present it en masse. So science is cumulative. It sort of reinvents itself as new things are discovered and new ideas are formulated. Our ideas about things change as time goes by. So at any one point, science can only really be thought of as the best current interpretation of the natural world. I mean, do you remember the good old days when Earth was surely flat? There's like a small percentage of the room who was like, you mean yesterday? But it was only during our parents' lifetime that the steady state theory of the universe was reassessed and rejected in favor of the Big Bang. So up until the 1960s, scientists thought that the universe always was and always would be existing in a steady state. And there are still so many unanswered questions. For example, as much as the Big Bang seems to answer the question about the origin of the universe, some of the finer details are hugely puzzling. I mean, the Big Bang states that the universe exploded into a state of being with a definite start when light was flung into the universe to later create all of what we know. But thermodynamics has shown us that rather than slowing down, as you would absolutely expect as they lose their initial energetic expression, instead they're speeding up. And scientists are merely guessing at possible explanations. And so, I mean, no judgment here, like I'm guessing at my own life all the time. It's vital to be aware and note how progressive our situation is and not hold on to anything too tightly. Similarly, for example, Darwinism, the second next major step in explaining how well-arranged dust became sentient, walking, talking, emotive humans capable of sharing this video and buying my book, has been vastly debunked, yet no official solution has replaced it beyond religious theologians' proposition of God. Yet to admit intelligent design is maybe only one small step towards any God. Contrarily, the Genesis account is almost 5,000 years old. It is the most popular story that has stood the test of time, only it hasn't been altered, updated, or changed radically the second a new discovery is made. Could it possibly be true, though? One theist scientist speculated, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak, and as he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. To prove intelligent design is possibly correct, I couldn't possibly simply point to one area of study and say, well, see here, the single cosmological evidence points to a creator. There's still a mountain of other features like biology, physics, astronomy, and so on that I need to budge this stalemate. But that necessity works both ways. I need a mountain of evidence to prove that the universe is self-created. Yet as new science emerges, it seems to increasingly point more and more obviously to a creator. As soon as I really looked, I saw how obvious the answer was, but no one was saying it. No one was making the next step towards the possibility of an intelligent designer to a wholly loving God's creation. I think of it as if someone were to examine a car. For example, they'd conclude that it moves because of gasoline in an engine. But somewhere Ford would be saying, well, yeah, because I made it so. So in the name of open-minded intellectual curiosity, allow me to propose the science of God and the possible truth behind the creation story. For argument's sake, let's pretend that there surely was a supreme being who inspired the Holy Scriptures. What would it look like? How could it work? And the new science it's amazing. There are so many fascinating discoveries in the last few years that I was tempted to dive into, but I think we should save that for another time. But let me know in the comments how nerdy you want to get, and I can dive in and be more detailed if you're interested. But for now, I'll stick with summarizing. And I do highly recommend that you do your own research. Most of us stopped studying this stuff in high school or college and haven't even picked it up since Darwinism was a credible option for the evolution of sentient Facebook commenting men and women. First, there are two important things that we need to format the conversation properly. Number one, the first thing to remember is that most Holy Scriptures, like the Bible, were written on a 6th grade reading level, intended to be used throughout the millennia by people who had no idea what an atom was, or thermodynamics, or the laws of gravity. So the language of the Genesis account had to be vastly downgraded to a more simple and universal vocabulary. Secondly, the next thing we need to discuss is time itself. I say that because in order to explain the next steps, I need you to suspend your traditional concept of time. A major stopper for the creation account is time. The story is laid out to seemingly have occurred over 7 days. And you think it's very cut and dry. A minute is 60 seconds, an hour is 60 minutes. A day is 24 hours, 7 days a week, 1 year, and so on. And that they're all exact, but they're not. Time is relative. Not only do we know that time flies when you're having fun, which is a subjective explanation, but we also know that due to the gravitational pull of Earth, you age slower at the Dead Sea than you would in, say, Atlanta, Georgia, for example. This is called the special theory of relativity, established in 1905 by Einstein. He suggests that space-time depends on how things move past a stationary object. Gravity gets more powerful when there's more stuff, as it would have during those initial steps when the early universe was under more tightly condensed conditions. In other words, the gravitational pull was much more intense at the beginning than nowadays. The differences can be minute, but fascinating when you consider the implications for how this could be multiplied exponentially at a point place in the universe where gravity is more influential when it would have been when the Big Bang exploded and created a magnetic decrescendo or crescendo, depending whether you're looking at it moving forward or moving back. Renowned Jewish MIT professor Dr. Gerald Schroeder took the Genesis account head on when he noted in his research that the Bible speaks of a time from the viewpoint of the universe as a whole, which Schroeder interprets to mean the moment of quark confinement, when stable matter formed from energy early in the first second of the Big Bang. Schroeder calculates that a period of 6 days under the conditions of quark confinement, when the universe was approximately 1 trillion times smaller and hotter than it is today, equal to 15 billion years of Earth time today. This is all due to space expansion under core confinement. Thus, Genesis and modern physics are reconciled. The total duration of the creation was exactly 6 days as per the scale of time, which corresponded to the levels of gravitational forces at each step of the universe expansion. Whereas on our conventional time scale, it lasted 15 billion years in full agreement with the scientific data and reconciled as shown here. All of this is factual and evidenced as standard astronomy, but still fairly new, published as recently as only 1997. And there's only 6 days that were noted there because remember, on the 7th day he rested, okay? So that's not included as a part of the time. Anyways, fairly recently, the genius Stephen Hawking said that because of gravity, the universe could create itself out of nothing. But here's the problem. Gravity exists only in the space-time continuum. So Hawking wants gravity outside of space, time, and matter. You can't have creation of that before creation. Theologians would simply say that 2 Peter 2 explains that with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. In other words, he is outside of time, space, and matter, so he can move throughout the calendar like an author creating their latest novel. Speaking of a novel, I could have just bypassed that whole conversation and simply said that it's a shortcoming of the English translation of the Hebrew text, noting the word for day as a vague passage of time, but that'd be too easy. Now, with that framework laid out, let's start with the sciencey stuff and get nerdy here in chronological order as I've been doing. First, you've got the Big Bang. The universe explodes with a burst of light, energy, expanding from a point smaller than an atom into all that exists today. Its cooling led to 200 million years of darkness. Stars created galaxies. The Milky Way is formed when gravity pulled together clumps. Our sun is formed. Earth forms. The moon and stars. Then first life, simple cells pop up. Photosynthesis begins. It produces atmospheric oxygen. First cells, complex cells with a nucleus, eukaryotes, something like that. Then, first multicellular life, first animals during the Cambrian explosion. That's super interesting stuff. Then the first fish, then land plants, then the first insects, then reptiles. Then Pangea forms and then breaks up. Mammals and dinosaurs, then the first birds. Then you have your Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, which is the massive asteroid that killed about 75% of all species. Then your first primates, and then you have the Hominina tribe split up. Some of it becomes Pangeus, which goes into the chimpanzees. Some of it becomes Homogeneous, which then becomes human. Then you have your Stone Age, and then the origin of Homo erectus and Homo genus. So enough build up. Let's get to that ta-da moment that you guys have been waiting for. Ta-da! Y'all, it all goes in order. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, all of that's 5, 6, all of that during 7. The whole 1 day equals 24 hours thing was throwing folks off. It's the same thing, just worded differently than a 2018 scholar would schedule it and piece together in chunks rather than individually. So let me break this down for you further because I know that's too pretty and you're going to have questions. First, day 1, he says, let there be light. The cosmological model now accepted by most scientists describes the creation of the entire universe out of nothing from a point that is known as a singularity, a smaller point than an atom. The model is known as the Big Bang Theory. Space itself exploded in a cosmic fire, launching the expansion of the universe and giving birth to all matter and all of the energy in the universe. I love this Belgian astronomer's wording when he says that the entire universe jumping into existence in a trillionth of a second out of nothingness in an unimaginable flash of light is how he would expect the universe to respond if God were to actually utter the command, let there be light. So with a big bang, God explodes onto the scene. Science posits that the Big Bang was the beginning of time and space. But what about matter? That's considerably more enlightening, literally. The Big Bang did not produce matter as we know it. Not any of the 92 elements, such as carbon, oxygen, not the protons, neutrons, or electrons that would eventually combine to make atoms of those elements. By a fraction of a microsecond following creation, the primary material product of the Big Bang was concentrated as exquisitely intense energy. There are many different types of energy, but the form most manifest microseconds after the creation was electromagnetic radiation. In simplistic terms, something akin to a super powerful light beam. Then, within the first few moments following the creation, as the universe raced outwards, stretching space, a transition takes place, a transition, the basis for which was discovered by Albert Einstein and quantified in that most famous of equations, E equals mc squared, of energy condensing into the form of matter. A minute fraction of those light beams of energy metamorphosized and became the lightest of elements, primarily the gases of hydrogen and helium. Over eons of time, mutual gravitational forces pulled those primordial gases into galaxies of stars. The immense pressures within the stellar cores crushed the nuclei of hydrogen together, fusing them into form heavier elements, and in doing so, releasing the vast amounts of energy that we see as starlight. These forces of fusion, coupled with those of stellar explosions, supernova, yielded the 92 elements that eventually on planet Earth became alive and sentient. You know, it says Earth was formless, as in not yet formed, so that fits. He separated light from the darkness, which fits knowing that as things cooled, there was darkness for about 200 million years. He then separated the light from the darkness, referring to our gravitational pull around light sources, so that also fits. And in this instance, when the scriptures refer to the heavens, they're referring to the cosmos. To further this thought, 1 John 1:5 says, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Modern theoretical physics seem to agree that the whole universe is made from light. So when the holy books speak of God being everything, in everything, surrounding everything, it's incredibly profound. And it makes sense when you view it from this perspective. Then day 2. Let there be a vault, it says. As readers, the vault between the sky and water is so complex that it's easiest to drive right on through this one as though it were nothing. But in fact, it's important. It's talking about Earth's particular variety of air and everything contained in the space before me, right here. There's the chemical compounds in the air, sound waves, light waves, and other fun varieties of waves. There's gravity at just the right level. There's heat, not too much or too little, all contained differently and uniquely characteristic of our air, water, outer space, and subsequently land, including our climate's barometric pressure. The early atmosphere of the Earth was so thick that the sun itself was invisible from the surface. When the Earth formed, it was already spinning. So when the sun began to produce light, even though it was not visible from the surface, there were periods of light and darkness. It also mentions now Earth is covered with water, fitting perfectly with the Genesis account and several other versions of ex nihilo stories involving a water-filled Earth chaos. As Earth cooled, seas formed. Day 3, sea, land, and vegetation. Everything was previously covered in water. Next, dry ground makes its debut. As the planet continued to cool and the crust thickened, lighter rocks, mostly silicates such as quartz and granite, rose above the lower lying basalt, creating the first dry land. Once the chemistry of Earth's atmosphere had evolved sufficiently, God created various forms of life. Gymnosperms, the non-fruit-bearing plants, before angiosperms, which are the fruit-bearing plants. We also have geological and fossil record showing that Earth was underwater at some point or another. So that all works. Scientists still have no idea how the origin of life on Earth began, but we know that life can't come from non-life. There must be an outside influence. It's one of the greatest indicators of intelligent design. This is where we see the Creator's influence. He can create life. The first living cells originated during the Archean eon, which is right in here. And so with that, that's about 3.9 to 2.3 billion years ago. And so the first living cells originated then, and eubacteria used photosynthesis first. Then 2.5 billion years ago, we've gotten to develop an oxygen-rich environment. Eukaryotic cells developed, for example, algae and fungi and spores. So vegetation started very blobby before it fully developed after the Proterozoic era, okay? And then the takeaway there, though, is that oxygen is now introduced, which is important for day 4, lights in the sky. As the plant life and other life which God created proliferated, they absorbed sufficient amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases, allowing the Earth to cool to the point that the thick veil of clouds finally parted, allowing an observer on the surface of the planet to observe the sun, moon, and stars for the first time. In an oxygen-rich environment, we developed the type of atmosphere that brings seasons, tides, and a finely tuned ozone. With this, seasons are now marked and time is distinguishable. Then in day 5, water full of creatures and birds. 1 billion years ago, algae turned into trilobites, and now we have a huge turn in life on a cellular level. No longer did Earth just have plant matter. Now it had evolved into what will become the major deal breakers for the future theory of evolution and natural selection, the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion is considered the Big Bang of biological evolution. The preeminent belief in evolution came from Darwin's 1859 book On the Origin of Species, which theorized life having evolved with slow mutations from genetic shifts through a process of natural selection. It presented a body of evidence that the diversity of life arose by common descent through a branching pattern of evolution. In it, Darwin discussed then that the inexplicable lack of earlier fossils was one of the main difficulties for his theory of descent. The long-running puzzlement about the appearance of the Cambrian fauna seemingly abruptly, without precursor, could not be explained. What happened was the majority, or according to some experts, all of the world's 40 phyla, remember from science, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So phyla, the highest category in the animal kingdom, virtually sprang forth with unique body plans more than 500 million years ago. The sudden appearance of these radically new life forms, devoid of prior transitions, has overturned Darwin's tree of life. The evidences that Darwin expected to find upon furthering the research ended up being the opposite of what he needed in order to find for his theory to be correct. Life didn't get more simplistic on a smaller level, it became more complex. And the fossil record didn't turn up intermediate transitional animals to the degree that it should. And I could go on, but long story short, before I freak you out, I do believe scientifically and theologically in evolution, just on a micro level, okay? So don't freak out. What we do see from the fossil record, though, brings me nicely into day 6, animals. Now we've come into higher life forms, land dwellers, the insects, reptiles, 165 million years of dinosaurs. What about the dinosaurs? Everybody wants to know. Primate, apes, on up to modern man. Each generation gets taller, smarter, and stronger than the last. We used to call that Darwinism. Nowadays, we call it marrying up or #winning. Over millions of generations, marrying up starts to show effective changes in an average appearance and intellect. Most of those higher life forms I mentioned are pretty easy to follow. So let's skip ahead millions of years to humans. You've got two important parts of human evolution. First, anatomically modern humans, then behaviorally modern humans. The oldest Homo sapien fossils date back to 195,000 BC. In 170,000 BC, humans start wearing clothes right over in here. In 125,000 BC, humans control fire. Then starts the last ice age, covering everything north of New York in ice, from 110 to 10,000 BC. So it lasted 100,000 years. A little over halfway through, behaviorally modern humans migrate out of Africa for the first time. So that's almost 150,000 years of humans being entirely unimpressive. No talking, no writing, and little migration. They hung around Africa mostly. The only non-mediocre thing that they did was learn how to control fire. I mean, don't get me wrong, that was great, but it's weird to picture anatomically modern humans that look like us existing together for 150,000 years without being able to talk to each other. I mean, granted, that's debatable. Though humans had been anatomically modern for quite some time, it wasn't until 50,000 BC that they exhibited complex symbolic thought, cultural creativity, and all the other things that make humans humans. It's widely believed that this rapid development is tied directly to the development of complex languages in humans. Y'all, that source that I got that from, so good. It's been open in my inbox in my phone for literally a year and a half. Right. So then on day 7, God rested happily, it says. After deciding that all that he had created was good, the Creator took a break. During this time, life flourished. Think of the creation story as artists ourselves to understand how the flow of time and his approval works. In Ephesians 2:10, it says that we are God's handiwork. The Greek word for handiwork used is poema, the same word for poem. We are God's work of art. Do I think that he stopped creating life in our universe? Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. There could be life on other planets, but I mean, whatever, I don't care. That wouldn't change my belief system or make anything in creation incorrect. It just means that they didn't mention it in the account of it. But remember, up until 1543, people thought that the earth was the center of the universe. Nothing that has been discovered about the universe conflicts with what's currently written in the Bible. Now, we pick back up the story with the Bible's Adam and Eve and other primordial couples and ex nihilo stories discussing creation. Like all ex nihilo creation stories, those that create the universe out of nothing, the Big Bang starts in a time before time and gives us an origin event, one that seems to conjure light from darkness, heat from cold, order out of chaos. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys for being here. Please like and subscribe and show a little love in the comments. It's always encouraging to know that you're listening and considering things, and you know, that's really all I hope for with doing this. So they're just a few ideas for you to ponder that may help settle your soul. I love you guys. Thanks. How come nobody ever asks me if I'm ready? I'm just kidding.
Wait, hold on.
Okay, wait.